Your email? Okay, let's do it. Well, welcome everybody. We appreciate you being on. Just like to introduce myself. My name is Jen Ohlson. I'm the president and founder of Interactive Health Technologies, and this is going to be a big treat. We are just so honored to have our two panelists on board to talk to you about how to find funding for your program. I'm going to start introducing Keri Schoeff, who basically currently serves as the Safe and Healthy Student Specialist for the Arizona Department of Ed. She, right now, basically what that means is provides leadership and professional development for all components of Title IV funding and just a wealth of information and insight for federal funding. So she's going to have a lot of information at that 50,000 foot level about all of that information. Keri also taught secondary for many years and has had leadership roles with the USDA with child nutrition, the CDC, the ASCD, and a fun fact, Keri and I were both college heptathletes. So go sisterhood. I'd also like to introduce Matthew Bassett. Matthew is a K-8 PE teacher at San Jose Charter Academy. And this laundry list, or not laundry, but the resume list of the accomplishments that Matthew has put together is just incredible. Teaches at Cal State Long Beach in the kinesiology department, teaches a technology class, as well as a PE teacher at San Jose Charter. And as far as accolades go, California PE Teacher of the Year in 2017, the Southwest District Shape America PE Teacher of the Year at Elementary in 2018, and the Shape America National PE Elementary Teacher of the Year in 2018. So Matthew and Keri, thank you for being here. And Keri, I'll just have you say just a couple words if you want to say a little bit about yourself as well and kind of your part of this presentation.
Thank you, Jen. I appreciate it. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Today, we're just going to talk a little bit about some of the funding that's available. I think it's really awesome what IHT does, and other companies out there that are doing similar things. The funding's available for them as well. It's a super great opportunity right now, more so than ever, to get some of these advanced technologies into our schools beyond just physical education. So looking forward to having that conversation and trying to help you guys navigate.
Perfect. Great. And Matthew, you want to talk a little bit about I know you were going to talk about like you then had the success story in this and everything that you've done to actually request and receive your federal funding.
The federal funding land, because it can be a bit daunting. So yeah.
Perfect. Thanks, Keri. Matthew, how about you?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. And I think my whole thing is just be an advocate for yourself and your program and your students, and try to get what you can to help them move forward.
And we also have Jay Plotkin. He's on the backside. He's our IHT marketing director at the control panel. And if you haven't seen it, we sent out a great blog. Jay did a great story on Matthew and his vision, his leadership trailblazing about how he went about this. So that'll be included in an email that we send as follow-up with all the resources we're about to share. We're going to go through kind of a three-part agenda. As I mentioned, Keri's going to be our first part, and then Matthew will be our second. Our third will be a funding request roadmap. We're going to basically help you create your plan. We're going to help you know that timeline, get educated. The biggest thing about this is just having the confidence to go for it and to share your vision and to go after some of this funding that's available. If you do have questions, let's go ahead and ask those as we go. Let's not wait till the end. So there's a Q&A button down on your Zoom. Go ahead and ask a question and we'll get to them so we don't miss anything that if you have a question as we're in real time. Just a real quick overview of what IHT is. We have a lot of customers on. We have some people that are looking to get IHT, but this is more about informative for funding. So we're going to get right to that. But if you don't know what IHT is, we are the largest top selling heart rate monitor in education. We use heart rate monitors. We use assessment software. We've got curriculum resources and then professional development to really help link the physical, emotional, and the academic well-being for your students from kindergarten through graduation. We work in a couple different ways in verticals in schools, physical education classes where kids wear the monitors class to class. We're a Fitnessgram. We are the official software for the Presidential Youth Fitness Program, which is Fitnessgram nationally. We do statewide data collection and Texas, Illinois, with a lot of our schools in both Fitness Graham and Brockport. We have school counselors on right now who use our monitors for emotional self-regulation. So the monitors are worn all day long, and they help kids have that real-time feedback of what's happening emotionally through heart rate. Obviously, last year was a big year for online learning and accountability. We work with special education programs. We've just partnered with an incredible program, a curriculum called EduScize, which is kinesthetic learning and math, reading, phonics, and our learning languages. And it's a great way to build physical activity into your STEM programs. So on that note, this is a little bit about how the monitor works, but let's get right into it. Keri, why don't you take it right from here on how teachers can go about requesting the funding for their student wellness programs?
Perfect. Thank you, Jen. So I think first and foremost, it's important to understand what the funds are and what they're intended to be used for. And that, that's really important in this conversation, right? When we look at the opportunity for funds that are available, there's a ton right now, right? And most of it's coming from the CARES Act. So we'll start with the CARES Act, because the CARES Act is like specialized one-time funding that came from the federal government specifically for COVID-19 relief for our schools. And so it's a lot more limited than what the traditional funding is that we have available. So we'll go over that as well. So with the CARES Act funding, in March of 2020, the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security, otherwise known as the CARES Act, was approved and included $13.2 billion for K-12 education. That was just round one, right? After that, there was an additional $54 billion for ESSER 2 that was allocated through the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplement Appropriations, which is known as CRSA. So CARES is ESSER 1, CRSA is ESSER 2, and it was, like I said, another $54 billion. And then in March of 2021, the American Rescue School Emergency Relief, otherwise known as ARP ESSER, or ESSER 3, provided another $126 billion for K-12 education. So these funds have all been allocated to each state, and then a state organization like Arizona Department of Ed acts as a pass-through and gives the money to the schools. There's no application process per se. Your schools get money. If you get Title I money, you get ESSER 1, 2, and 3. And so when we look at that overview of that CARES Act funding, it's a lot of money right now. And it's a lot of people trying to get these funds as well, right? Because we're talking about everybody in your school environment wants access to this money. Arts educators, physical educators, buildings and school buses and Wi-Fi hotspots and technology, all of it's in there, right? So let's do a little bit of an overview of these grant spending deadlines that we're seeing. So for ESSER 1, again, all of your states have this money. They're in different places as to how it's been distributed to school districts, what we call LEAs. So if you hear of someone talk about an LEA, that's a district, or sometimes it's a single site charter, depending on how your state operates. And all of the federal grant programs and states operate a little bit differently. So the money's out there right now. All of the states have ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3, but they all have different deadlines for how and when they have to be spent. So ESSER 1, your LEA or your district has these funds and has to spend them before September 30th of 2022. Because they added on ESSER 2, they have a year longer, so you don't have to spend those funds until September 30th of 2023. And the ESSER 3 funds don't expire until September 30th of 2024. So when you're having these conversations with administrators, principals, or anybody else at your district that you're going to be working with when you're talking about these funds that are coming through, it's important to know that when they tell you that they're already spent or they're already allocated, that they might not be talking about all 3 rounds of ESSER. And ESSER 3 was a really big chunk of money. So it might still be out there, even if they think it's not. So it's important to understand the differences just in the 3 rounds of CARES Act funding with ESSER that is out there and that's available.
And is this the biggest, Keri, just to ask you a question, is this the biggest thing that I think teachers or administrators get stuck on? on, well, the money's not there, they said they've spent it?
Yeah, so we've heard a few conversations about people when they go to have conversations with their federal programs director, or maybe it's their principal or their district lead, someone's telling them that the ESSER funds are already spent and allocated. And that might be true for ESSER 1 and possibly ESSER 2, but in theory, for it to be true for all 3 rounds of ESSER would be, an interesting thing. I'll give you one example. The largest school district here in Arizona got $250 million just for ESSER 3. So you're not talking about a little bit of money. And to think that an LEA has had all 3 rounds already spent, that's strange, because those needs change, right? That's why they have a few years to use those funds, because needs change, right? You're in the middle of a year and all of a sudden you have to go virtual. You have to accommodate for those needs. Now that you're back in person, then you have different needs than you did when you were only virtual. So because the needs change, the flexing is extremely flexible. This is the most flexible funding we've seen in a long time. Like, you can do all kinds of things with this funding, including things like replacing drinking fountains with water bottle filling stations, which normally you can't do that with federal funds because you're not allowed to fund construction. And so when you're looking at the opportunities, right, we have people buying school buses and putting Wi-Fi routers in the school buses so their kids can get on laptops on the way to school and on the way home from school. And here in Arizona, that's a thing for schools on the reservation, right? It takes an hour bus ride. Kids can do their homework. Like, you can't normally do that with federal funds. So that being said, now is a great opportunity to get more equipment for your classroom, new technology for your classroom, cleaning supplies for some of the equipment and technology that you already have. This is great opportunity for these funds because they're very flexible and you can buy all kinds of things with ESSER funds.
That's fantastic. I mean, there's really never been this much money in the history of education, I don't think, at one time.
There hasn't been.
Yeah, it's great to have this opportunity. And beyond ESSA or beyond CARES, there's the ESSA funding. And can you talk a little bit about some of the other buckets that are available beyond all the money you just mentioned?
Right. Let me do one quick thing before I move on to that. I just want to let you know that any federal fund has to be, there has to be a comprehensive needs assessment and an integrated action plan done in order to get those funds. So your LEA, whether that's a district or a school, has to have a plan, an integrated action plan on how they're going to use these funds. And as a state agency, it's our job to make sure that what they're trying to buy aligns with that plan. So first step you need to do, which I'll get into this a little bit later in more detail, is figure out what's in your school or your district's action plan. And then that's how you can get into some of that funding. But that's also true for the other federal funding that's available all the time that's not tied to coronavirus. So these federal funding streams are based on socioeconomic status of your students, right? So we know that schools that have high free and reduced lunch counts in their schools get more money in Title I funds because it's based on economic need of the students. So some districts have a really large pot of Title I money because they have more high need students. And then other districts or LEAs will have a smaller amount just because of that. But the base for some of these funds, it's a big complicated formula, so I won't get into that, but I will tell you a little bit about each of these funds. So traditional federal funding, which is through the Every Student Succeeds Act, known as ESSA, there's a few different ways you can get that funding. Title I provides most of the school funding, but it's designated only for those students on free and reduced lunch. So if you're at a school district and there's 10 schools and 6 of them are Title I and 4 of them are not, those 4 non-Title I schools don't have access to that Title I money. Only those 6 schools that have Title I status can get Title I money. So it's the largest chunk of money that a district's going to get, but it's not necessarily going to be able to go to all students. And so understanding that first and foremost is important. Title II, which is also in ESSA, is your big professional development grant. So if you wanted to pay somebody from IHT to come out and do professional development, Title II could pay for that. right? It's designed for LEAs to provide the best professional development to their teachers that they can. And so if there's costs associated with any of that, that's a great bucket to use for that funding. It's also used for teacher recruitment and retention. So if you're struggling getting certified teachers or keeping teachers in your school or district, Title II can help pay for that. The grant that I review in Arizona, and the one that I'm most familiar with, is Title IV-A, the Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grant. And Title IV-A is a game-changing grant for us. It's got 3 different areas that it focuses on. Those 3 areas are well-rounded education, safe and healthy students, and the effective use of technology. And if you look at physical education, specifically, we are in all 3 of those areas, right? So it's because a well-rounded education is a student's civil right. If our schools are not providing health and physical education, we're actually violating our students' civil rights. So one of the talking points we use for Title IV-A is to support health and physical education programs because they're guaranteed civil rights for our students. And so in well-rounded, we're one of the 17 subject areas specifically listed in well-rounded. Safe and healthy, that's pretty obvious. If we want to make sure our students are safe and healthy, a quality physical education program and an effective physical education program is one way to do that. And then the effective use of technology, which is typically for professional development. And I'll get to that picture that Jen put up on that slide in just a second. But that effective use of technology is how to effectively use technology. So let's say if you bought something like a heart rate monitor, right? And you wanted to teach your counselors how to use it to monitor the emotions of students, you could actually pay for professional development in the effective use of technology category because you're teaching people how to effectively use technology. Okay, so this next slide, the other funding that's available is Title IV-A-B, which is the 21st CCLC after school program, but that funding isn't guaranteed, right? The other funds are based on student population. Title IV-B is, you have to apply for that grant. So that slide that you put up just before, the 2020 rule, that applies to LEAs that get more than $30,000. It's kind of a complicated process. But basically, if your LEA gets a Title IV-A grant that's more than $30,000, they have to spend some of it in well-rounded, 20% in well-rounded, 20% in safe and healthy, and then they have to spend at least $1 in the effective use of technology. Of that pocket for effective use of technology, only 15% can be spent on like devices. So there are some kind of caveats in there with that Title IV-A funding. If your LEA has less than 30,000, they can spend it anywhere. So thanks for going back to that, Jen. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and there was a national survey of when they passed Title IV Part A on, you know, how schools were going to spend the funding at the time. And can you kind of just talk to this slide of where schools are focusing that money?
Yeah, so I can, this national survey was great when it came out. We saw exactly what we thought we would see, right? When we saw this, because we know schools have already been spending money on language arts and math and science and social studies. They've already been doing that. So these new rounds of funding, specifically the Title IV Part A, you can see that most of the schools are looking for safe and drug-free schools, right? All of which are things we teach about in health and physical education. School counseling, another big one. Clearly, we saw last year the emotional health of our students became a priority, and having school counselors in place certainly makes an impact in that. We're looking at AP, IB exam fees. A lot of our LEAs are using it for that. There's physical education, right? A lot of our LEAs take Title IV-A funding and fund salaries and benefits for PE teachers. You can use Title I and Title IV-A to fund PE teacher salaries and benefits, right? And then the other category is just kind of a catch-all for what everybody else needs. So the next slide is something that I took some time to make, and I don't know, Jen, or if you can post the link in the chat. But I created, and this will be in the resources, so no worries if you don't get it here in this chat, but I took the federal funding guide, right? that we had for SEL, and I put it with the WISC model. So it's got the 10 components of the WISC model, which include health and physical education, and then all of those funding streams I just mentioned. So you can look at Title I, II, 4A, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 and see what kinds of things you can buy with those different federal funding streams, because they're all a little bit different, and understanding how those funds work is really important in this conversation.
Yeah, that is a great slide. And as Keri mentioned, that's going to be part of the resources that we'll send after this. And I went through it, and it just literally, it's just insightful on just helping people really even have that creative spark of like, wow, I really didn't even know I could purchase this stuff or go after this. So, and talk a little bit about how the funding is allocated for that ESSA and how states have decided to divide this up.
So, it depends on the legislations in your state, right? So the money is divided, like I said, based on socioeconomic status. So some areas of the country get a lot more money than other areas because they have high socioeconomic, they've got high free and reduced lunch student counts, right? So your more rural areas don't always get as much funding as your more urban areas just because of size alone, right? For Title 4A specifically, the minimum size of your grant is $10,000, regardless of how big your Title I grant is. So if your school or LEA only got $1,000 for Title I, they would automatically get $10,000 for Title 4A. So it's a pretty beneficial grant. You can see based on the slides that Jen put up that, the blue states kind of evenly divide the money between all districts. Yellow states, they've kind of made it more competitive. Purple states are kind of more based on Title I needs. Orange states, they predominantly transfer Title 4A. And like I said, every state kind of does it differently, but there are federal laws that regulate this money. So if you're curious about how this money works in your state, I recommend going to your state Department of Education website and looking that up. There's also some resources like the slide that Jen's on now that shows what the state plans are. So every state has to write a plan, just like every LEA has to write a plan. And we have to tell the federal government what we're doing with our set aside. So the state gets like 10% of this money, right? Arizona uses this portion of the grant to fund our salaries, to provide professional development to teachers for free, and to do other things to support well-rounded, safe and healthy, and the effective use of technology. So each state does something different. So this link on this slide for the state plans kind of shows what your state has already planned. This is for ESSER. So this is also true for ESSA funds. You can look on the same the Federal Department of Education website. It'll show you what the ESSA funds are, as well as the ESSER funds and what those state plans are. You can literally look at your school district and figure out how much you get.
That's fantastic. That's great. Well, we talked a lot about, what the funds are out there. I want to take it now down to Matthew on, you've had a vision, you went for it, you put a request in, and now your vision has become a reality at San Jose Charter. Can you just talk a little about your story and in the process of taking everything Keri said and bringing it down to the troops on the ground at your side and at the school?
Yeah, I think my path, as we were reflecting on it, I think it started like 2017, if I really want to be honest. And it was probably after going through Shape America, it may have been 2018, actually. And I was able to kind of see what I considered the next step for our program in use of technology for wearable technology. And I ended up having 2 IHT people that came out to my school, and they were on their way over to a local school district to do training for them. And we were able to have a few heart rate monitors on our campus at the same time. And I invited my 3 administrators, actually all of my administrators, and 3 of them actually came out for a class period, which was really, really cool. And then it kind of was one of those things we were talking about, but it really didn't ever materialize. So last spring in 2021, as we were winding down the school year, I know that my school tends to, any extra funds that we have, we try to use it for whatever we need to purchase. And then we were able to get new supplies or equipment for our own program. And I knew that the ESA funding, the CARES funding was coming to an end at a certain point. And I literally walked in and I said to my principal, hey, we've talked about this for a few years. What would the chances that we could get some of the funding that's coming from the government to go for our heart rate monitors? And then I remember my principal walking over, opening up a binder and pulling up kind of what we had been talking about for a while, which was being able to create the budget for this, and was able to say, yeah, we've talked about this for a while. Let me think about this and let me see what I can do. And it was, I think, just well timed, because I think I didn't really hear anything. And I know that we need board approval at my school. I'm actually at a charter school where one of those where we are our own LEA. So we're our own district, basically, is the way it works. And the next thing I know, I get an email about 2 weeks later saying that the purchase order has been approved and we will be getting the heart rate monitors. So I was pretty blown away. But I think that the conversation and what it had to offer, it was a 2-year plus in the making. We just, all of a sudden, it was just the right timing, and we were able to kind of push it forward really, really quickly. So.
Yeah, Matthew, I think, you planted the seed and then kept watering it. And I think that's a lot of times we tend to take no, and that's it. In our profession, or as teachers or administrators. But talk about how you kept bringing the conversation up, and then it just happened to be the right time where the stars aligned for you.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think that as a teacher, I remember in my university level hearing, Matt, you've got to be an advocate for your program. And I took that to heart a lot, especially earlier in my career. What they didn't tell me was that a lot of times you would have to be an advocate, even in year 21 for me this year, more than I was in year 1. And I was really trying to focus on what it is that could help our students, what could help us to go through the next stage. And knowing that our students spent 18 months on a virtual environment, I knew that the students, I had a lot of students who didn't move a whole lot during that time, even though that we held classes digitally. So I knew that we wanted to have something that would be beneficial to them, and wearable technology was a good addition so that we can focus more on the fitness tasks. And I think that what's really awesome about it is the IHT system allows me to send the data to the students daily. And it also allows me to have the option to send it to their parents as well. So then the parents can see what they're doing in class, how engaged are they with the movement. And it's not something like me checking off a list somewhere and what I think that they're doing. It's really what they are doing. And I think that's a big benefit, and that it's, what's the word I'm looking for? Subjective, not objective. And that's really, really important.
Yeah, and we touched on it at the beginning about what IHT does, and we're more than just the heart rate, but the curriculum aspects as well. I think trying to provide resources like this webinar, but also trying to provide not just the technology and the measurable reports, but those resources as well. I think we're kind of a game changer for you, or you hope to be this year.
Yeah, and I know that when we were looking at the IHT back when you came out for the visit, the thing that really struck out to my principal was that there was a curriculum and an assessment resource, so that when we're talking about the standard ones for our state standards or national standards, that they had some resources that were already built into the system that we could utilize. And that's something that I am really excited about with the curriculum that is there, not only for those motor learning standards, but also the fitness standards. And how do I introduce these things to the students, and getting them to be able to see how much they're actually moving during class.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to our third part of our agenda, and that's the steps to secure funding. Keri's going to start kind of again at that federal level about, the questions that we're going to kind of move through, like strategy and the timing, the logistics involved in this. And then I'm just going to go over some of the ways that you guys can become advocates and some of the resources that we're going to provide you after this, because we want you to end this webinar with actual items in your hands that tomorrow you can go put your proposal together and talk to your administrator, your principal about sharing your vision. So let's get into the first slide, and that's kind of knowing the key players. And Keri, why don't you start about how important it is to kind of know the landscape of what you're dealing with before you go out and ask for the funding?
Yeah, so I think it's super important to understand how your LEA works, right? If you're that single site charter, like Matthew works at, it's totally different than if you're working at Miami-Dade, right? Where you've got, 1,000 schools, right? So you have to understand what your process looks like first and foremost. Principals, great place to start. If you have a district coordinator for physical education or health, they're a good place to start because they're typically tapped into. Know who your district technology director is. If you're talking about bringing something like IHT or a heart rate monitor on your campus, then you have to have their support because they're going to be the ones that are helping you with the software installing on your computer and some of the other things, right? Who's writing curriculum at your district? If you have a director of curriculum, they're a good person to go to because they can help fund curriculum and understand what your LEA rules are and what your state rules are on curriculum for that matter. Maybe you have a school wellness council or an SEL or even like school counselors that sometimes do SEL and wellness, like connect with those people. Obviously, somebody at your LEA is a federal programs director. And if you don't have that person at your LEA, sometimes there's a federal grant coordinator that they work with outside of your LEA. So they might be paying someone to come in and work with your grants, but the needs of the LEA have to be the needs of the LEA. That person just basically does the grant application process, right? So, and then you might also have a standalone grant writer for your district that can do things beyond just the federal grants that are available, talking about your local, state, and national grants like Fuel Up to Play 60 or some of the other program grants that are out there. And so learn what that process is like, because if you don't understand how to navigate those waters, it can be tricky. And again, it's different for every LEA. I really wish there was like a one size fits all, but start as close to home as you can, right? Start with your principal and then work your way up the chain. It's not an easy conversation for you to go talk to a federal programs director. So just make sure you follow the rules and kind of the environment that you're in.
Perfect. And Matthew, how about you on your side? What was your roadmap to navigating this first off and moving up the chain?
Well, being that we're a smaller entity than a big district, it was nice because I was able to work with my admin. I think knowing who to go see is important, but I think being prepared to go talk to them is really important. Show them why it's going to benefit your students or our students and why it will be helpful for a teacher to implement. I think that if you go in, sometimes I wonder if I'm kind of viewed as I just have this big old long wish list, but I'm not really going to use things. But having the kind of the foresight of what it's going to look like is definitely a very helpful tool so that when you are having those conversations, that passion, that guidance comes across, and that it's not just you trying to look for something just because you're looking for something.
Absolutely. And Keri, can you talk to this slide as well about having the strategy and the importance of that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, right, any good program starts with why. If you can tell your administrator or, if you're lucky enough to be able to talk to the person that writes the grant, why you need these funds, and it aligns to your integrated action plan that I mentioned earlier, that's important, right? So first and foremost, find that integrated action plan, figure out what's written into it. And then just like it says down here from the other, see if you can plug into it anywhere, right? So if you have an overall integrated action plan of academic achievement for students, then you need to get the research and data that shows how physical fitness impacts academic achievement. That's your buy-in, right? So figure out what your LIAP is, and then you can look at those expectations of long-term and short-term goals and how what you want to do is going to impact that LEA goal, right? That's huge. You have to plug yourself into what's already existing. It's not going to be easy if you just go, I need these because they're cool, right? Or because my students like to have wearable technology. That's not necessarily going to get you what you need. You've got to show why and how it fits into what the district needs. And then I think that, oh, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, go ahead. Continue.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and then that last piece, right? Like there's other places to get funding from if you can tap into those other program areas. And so understanding the connections between fitness and SEL and mental health and all of those is super important as well.
Absolutely. Matthew, why don't we talk about logistics? And I mean, how was it to, once you had the vision, making IHT a vendor? And, you know, I mean, you were a small school, but if you're, I know I've got a couple people on from Dallas and some of these larger school districts that are really, you know, that might be a process of 3 to 4 months. But what is the importance of logistics in your strategy?
I think it's really important. You know, talking with your technology people, my school is a Mac-based school, Apple products. So I know that the IHT system does need to utilize PC. So I had to have a conversation with my technology department about getting something so that we could work. So they decided that they wanted to go with, and I'm going to use the wrong words, and I apologize to all of you online. There are programs that you can run a Windows environment on your Mac, and I forget what the name of that is.
Parallels or Boot Camp, I think.
Yes.
A couple of them.
So that is something that has taken some time, and it's taken a little longer than I would have liked, but it also is important to be patient and make sure that you're being nice to the technology department for that. So it does take time. You need to talk with people, and then you definitely want to make sure that you're getting the students excited about it. You know, I've talked with my students already this year. I have a brand new pocket chart for my TV cart, and they're like, Mr. Bassett, why is there 2 numbers on here? Because we've been using another piece of technology called clicker cards. And I've just been like, oh, we're using heart rate monitors. They're coming. Like, just trust me here. This is really cool. Be patient. I'm really excited about it. So, and then that gets the students kind of excited, and they're like going to be really hooked by the time I get ready to go with them. So.
And in your blog, you really hit home on just kind of, you know, really being an advocate. And Keri, if you can kind of talk about just kind of overcoming a lot of times, you know, we've had a lot of lack in physical education. So we don't think we're worthy, or the funding's going somewhere else. But how do we overcome those stereotypes and moving the language that puts us, you know, at the forefront of being the centerpiece of an overall comprehensive wellness plan?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's understanding the language, right? If you know the difference between Title I, Title II, Title 4A, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, ESSER 3, and you go into that conversation with that knowledge, you're a step ahead of most everybody else in the game. I know it's super easy. Like Jen said earlier, I taught high school PE for a long time. There's a lot of autonomy in physical education because you're the only one in the gym, sometimes for months. Like the only time some of the administrators come through is to do your evaluation, and you know, it's maybe 1 or 2 days a year, and then the rest of the time you're kind of out there by yourself, so you feel like you're alone, but you're not. All right, there's a lot of other teachers who appreciate health and wellness, so get them to advocate with you. Engage parents, right? Engage your students. How impactful is it if there's a group of parents and teachers at a school board meeting advocating for health and fitness? Right? That's a big deal, and that's a very impactful thing. So I think the more you can collaborate with others, the better, so that you're not the only one sending that message, right? There's an African proverb that says, to go fast, go alone, to go far, go together. So when you want something that's going to last and it's going to be impactful for beyond just that initial funding, you've got to work together with other people so that you can get that far out of it, right? You can get the multiple years of support. So like Matt said earlier, it's not just I advocated and then I'm done. You have to work harder, right? Each year to continue to get those funds. So, you know, work together. That's first and foremost. Don't be the lone. And if you are the only PE teacher at your LEA, like I said, engage parents, other teachers, and students to come and, you know, advocate for you as well.
Great advice. And finally, on the timeline, just kind of talk about the importance of, you know, not only knowing the background and all of the facts of ESSA and CARES and the difference, but the timeline is super important as well. And Keri, why don't you start, and then we'll finish with Matthew.
Yeah, so most of our LEAs here in Arizona start working on their integrated action plans in like December. And then they start writing their grants in January or February. And then early funding numbers get released in March, and they have their grants fully submitted by May. And so that's here in Arizona. It might work a little differently in your state, but that's pretty typical for what we see across the country when we connect with other state agencies. So if you're not already having that conversation right now, you should. You should absolutely figure out what your district's needs are, what they've written in that integrated action plan, or what they're trying to accomplish, and then figure out how to tap into that right now. Like, you can have that conversation as soon as September, October, because your LEA leaders are already having those conversations, and they might already be allocating those funds without you at the table. So get into that table as quick as you can. Figure out where they spent it last year. That should be available somewhere on your State Department of Ed website. You can actually see how much each LEA got, and then you can see a breakdown of what they spent their money on. Because these are federal dollars, state agencies have to be transparent, and so do your districts. So you should be able to talk to the leadership at your LEA and find out where these funds went, and if they're not going to health and fitness, how they can.
Perfect. And Matthew?
Yeah, I think knowing when the timelines for everything is really important, and definitely start asking earlier than later. Knowing that when we start to close out the 2021-22 school year, we're going to be starting to look at the budget and how California is going. We'll be looking at, hey, do we have extra money for various things? I would be looking at trying to approach administration January, February, March, and then making sure that I don't just ask and then walk away and assume that everything's good. Keep asking. Definitely, you know, like I think we talked about, Keri talked about, go to your PTO, your parent organizations, go see what's going on with them. I mean, they may have money left over that they didn't know about. You know, I always talk with my students about technology can be stressful and horrible. Could you find a way to fund 10 of them? And 10 doesn't seem like a lot, and it would drive me absolutely nuts. But when your students are able to get them on themselves and they go home and tell their parents how there's only 10 for their class, those parents are going to be on your side really quickly. And they'll be able to help you and to push through. So definitely take your research with you of why this is going to be important. And, you know, contact your administrator and start and say, hey, who are the people I need to talk to, and send them an email, or go and knock on their door at their office at the district level. So I think just making sure that you do your best. And, you know, I can't tell you how many times in my career I've heard no, and that's okay. Like I said, with mine, it was like a whirlwind, because I just walked in and I doubted myself a little bit about like, oh, I'm going to go ask for this and this isn't going to happen. This is not a good time. But I said, you know, why not? You know, this is for the students. We have the ability to do this. We have funding that's not normal, and we might be able to utilize some of that for what we're doing. And everything fell into place for me really quickly.
And you guys talked a lot about, and Keri, I loved your, you know, going far, go together. It's not just with the collaboration within your school, but you guys are both so involved and such leaders with our national organizations and our state AFERDs. And talk about the importance. Matthew, why don't you start, being a teacher of the year, National Elementary Teacher of the Year, on the importance of being involved as an advocate, not just at your school, but in our profession on a national level, and what that's meant to you as a teacher.
Yeah, so I think I've had and I don't remember who started this. I think it might have been Andy Milne. Always have your elevator speech ready. I cannot tell you how many times that I have people who talk to me about very stereotypical physical education teachers. I grade on the mile, I grade on what you wear, I grade on you showing up to class on time. Those are the big things. You need to be ready to share what quality practices and why it's important. The state and national organizations, they're looking behind the scenes at those legislative things that come up. I know in California, we've had a lot of groups that have challenged we have a state law on the number of minutes to be in physical education every 10 school days. And we've had a lot of groups that have challenged that law because of the stereotypical teachers. You always need to be out there looking out and sharing. When I talk to parents, like, what do you mean they don't just show up and get an A? No, there's learning involved in my class, and here's some examples. It's always good. And you know that the state and the national organizations, they're doing this all the time. I haven't had the chance to go to a Speak Out Day yet, but it is a really powerful time where they go out and meet the lawmakers and share with them why we need to be included. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong here. Originally, ESA funding didn't include a well-rounded education for physical education. I think it was added afterwards, after all of these organizations went and said, hang on, we need to be included in the wording, because districts will not include us if we're not specifically listed.
Yeah, exactly. That's the power of us together doing that as a profession. And Keri, talk a little bit about, you know, SHAPE's resources and the Department of Ed's, the information that you've shared, and how there's just so much there. There's a wealth of information right at our fingertips to get started.
Yeah, and I think that's the best part of it, right? Like the fact that we have a space to go to on Shape America to help us advocate for this funding is amazing, right? I wrote a blog post for Shape America about CARES Act funding, so that's in there if you want more information there. But Shape's got this very robust advocacy platform. There's parts of the advocacy website that actually fill a letter for you to contact your local congressman, right? Your senators and your representatives, and it fills it out. You just put your name and it sends it to them. And I have gotten several emails back from those constituents regarding the letters that I've sent through Shape America. I actually did have an opportunity to go to Speak Out Day last year, and it was super impactful. Getting to speak to, your nationally elected leaders is a big deal. It's a big opportunity. One of the gentlemen, one of our congressmen, our PE teacher of the year, Kyle Bragg, who was also the Shape America National Elementary PE Teacher of the Year this year, actually invited him to come to the school to go hiking with the kids. And they set up a time for that to happen. So he's making a direct impact by showing the advocacy efforts through Speak Out Day and through Shape America, right? So they are real, they do happen, they do listen. There's a lot of impactful things that go on behind the scenes that Carly Wright and the folks at Shape America are always doing. And so that's a great opportunity, and tapping into that's super important.
Absolutely. And do we have a question? I think we do. The question is from Faith. You mentioned a connection to STEM and SEL learning. And Faith, I'll talk a little bit about that as far as what IHT can do, but our system allows you to link all of that information. But Keri, can you talk a little bit about the importance of connecting the SEL? And Faith, I'm sure if that's what you meant, like connecting physical education to those things in your vision. But IHT allows you the opportunity to do that through our technology. But do you want to talk about how important that is? Answer that
Sure.
question.
So the number one thing we're seeing right now with ESSER funds, this just came out in Shape Momentum just yesterday, is SEL. And so a lot of states and LEAs across the country are putting money towards SEL. And when you're talking about social emotional learning, you're talking about things that improve opportunities for students to be connected, not just in school subject areas, right? And so we all know as health and physical educators that there is a clear connection between positive emotion and fitness, right? We know that physical fitness decreases depression, increases sleep. There's all kinds of things that connect to if our kids are being healthy, not just physically fit, but healthy as far as mental health, physical health, emotional health, and all of the stages of health. And so there's my favorite education saying is students have to Maslow before they can bloom, right? So we've got to take care of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is those health aspects of it, before we can worry about Bloom's taxonomy, which is the education side of it. So SEL and health and fitness go together hand in hand, because kids that are healthy physically are oftentimes more healthy emotionally and mentally than some of their peers.
And what, Matthew, you want to comment on that, Matthew?
Yeah, I think what I also want to point out is physical education is the only subject matter where the social emotional learning standards are embedded into our curriculum. That is massive foresight from those that sat down to work on those. Most people that I talk to that are really shocked at some of the things I do in class, they don't realize that we have standards. They think that we just roll the ball out. So when we started talking about these are the motor learning standards we want you to learn, here's their fitness things, And then the social emotional, you usually can see their jaw hit the ground pretty quickly because they're like, what? And I think that that's where, like, we really as physical educators need to make sure that we are spending time on social emotional, especially post COVID. We've had a lot of students who had the trauma with going out. I mean, that was a really stressful week for me. We didn't know what was going on at my school. Are we going out? Are we coming? Are we staying in? Ultimately, when our local Los Angeles Unified finally decided to go out for 2 weeks, we went out for 2 weeks. And unfortunately, we'd been there for a long time. So there's a lot of things that came from that. You know, the students, I was struggling with students because they didn't want to turn the cameras on because they were possibly embarrassed about the way that they looked, you know, being at home is different than being in person. So for me, I spend a lot of time with social emotional at the beginning of every school year to lay the foundation, because it doesn't matter what I teach them if they're not working together, if they're not using kind words, if they're not, there's a lot of things here. Really important to make sure that social emotional is attached to it. And again, we're the only standards that have that embedded in them. And that really shows the power of what we could do.
And with the IHT monitor, heart rate is the most accurate and precise way to measure physical experiences and emotional experiences. So when your kids are feeling stressed and anxious, the heart rate monitor allows, you know, Matthew will be in his class and they may be getting their monitor's physical activity, but they're also able to be really mindful of what's happening in their body and being displayed on the device as well. So what we try and do is connect that through our technology, and then the reports to be able to bring that together. The CASEL standards are aligned to standard 4 PE metrics, the national standards within our software. So if you're a physical education teacher and you want to go over the 5 components of SEL and match that to locomotive skills of hopping, skipping, jumping, working well with others, responsibility, we're able to bring those standards and that SEL together as well. So having that measurable data, we talk about getting this funding, but the way you continue to get funding and the way that you really sell this is having a way to prove it through data, how you're driving your program forward. And that's what we try and do as an organization, and as well as the resources. So we've talked a lot about how to go. I'm just going to kind of finish up here as we wrap. There's some other opportunities out there. We've talked a lot about the federal funding, but there are state and local grants, as Keri mentioned. Their funding is out there. So there's some great tools. School Specialty has one, and we'll send a link on this as well. You see it down the bottom. That will be on this slide deck. That will help you find local and state grants right in your area. Those are great. Following the funding updates on Twitters, I've just listed a few here, but at IHT Spirit, we're constantly putting out information, tweeting other educators and leaders in our field, as well as ESSA and the ESSER funding as well. And build that network at IHT, thanks to the great Bob Knipe, who's one of our former customers and employees, started Phys Ed Chatter. And we just like to really kind of put information, but there's a lot of great organizations and networks out there on Facebook, Twitter, and our social media networks as well. So when we end tonight, what you guys are going to get is an email with a slide deck. We're also going to provide all the resources that Keri went over at the beginning, and as well as a funding resource guide from IHT, and sort of wrapping up the different ways that you can purchase technology or drive your program forward no matter what that is. Faith, you mentioned the SEL component. We also have a great roadmap to answer your question about how do we combine and link the implementation of IHT for your emotional and your physical well-being. And this is a great 8-page roadmap that kind of takes you through the steps to help you get thinking again. We also have funding ideas and a 2-page template ready to go. So Jay, when he sends this out, there'll be a template in there in a Word document. You just download it, make it however you want. Contact one of my staff here at IHT and we can help you build that budget. But basically we've done 90% of the work that you can take this into your principal or your administrator on Wednesday or Thursday of this week. So trying to provide at least those steps. And then of course on our IHT blogs, our latest blog is on Matthew, the importance of advocating for your students to get them quality PE time. Also a great Shape America article from Shape's president-elect Kim Ballard. And so some great ways to just sort of get inspired and some other ideas. So I just want to have some closing notes, Keri, if you want to just kind of wrap up and just sort of a synopsis of everything that we've talked about tonight in closing remarks.
Yeah, sure. So, I talked a lot about federal funding, but the one thing I think I neglected to mention is that there's a bunch of people advocating for these funds, right? So in Arizona, we did arts and physical education. We worked together, right? We worked together to create our reentry guidelines for going back to in-person instruction. And we worked together because if we can teach the arts education professionals how to educate for physical education, and if we can teach the physical educators how to educate or how to advocate for arts education, we're in it together and we have a stronger voice. And there's very similar things between arts and physical education. Dance is very movement-based. Lots of physical activity going on in dance classes. There's also some SEL components that are in arts as well. And so we have a lot of common ground and that we're always fighting for money. So if you fight together instead of fighting against each other, it's stronger. But first and foremost, advocate for this money, understand what it is, what it's for, how to get it, and how to have that conversation, and start with why.
Matthew, how about you? Some final remarks?
I think it's just be an advocate for yourself and your students. Try to remind people what your goal is to make sure that you're producing well-rounded individuals in your classes. I think that you want to try to get as many people on your side, like Keri was just sharing. Get those parents that will support you. I am also one of those people. I think there's a hierarchy of how you share information. I think that there is some value in telling people. I think that there is more value in showing people. And I've been able to show people through pictures and or videos that have been taken during class time. But when things are a little bit better right now, I can't do this at my campus, but show them by, like you were just talking with Kyle, invite people into your programs and show them what they are missing, what is really good. My good friend, Will Potter, started something called Bring Your Parents to PE Week. And that was because he was a little worried that he wasn't going to have a job in the following school year. And he hasn't had to worry about that ever again. So it's a really good opportunity to show off what the best practices are and what a well-rounded education should look like with a quality physical education program.
Great. Well, you guys have been such change agents for the profession and everything that you've done. And we just really appreciate you guys sharing your knowledge to all of our future change agents, taking all this information and passing that baton to everybody who's attended. And just let us know how we can help. You can reach out to me at jen@ihtusa.com. Happy to answer your questions. And of course, we'll get an email out to you shortly with all of these resources. So best of luck. Thank you for all you do, all of you, especially Matthew and Keri, for being part of this. And we look forward to connecting with you guys soon. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.